Hi everyone, and welcome to the very first episode of the Hilo Stitch podcast. I am Kristen Janik, the pattern designer behind Media Peruana Designs, and I am here to talk to you about knitting, obviously, and designing, and all of the other things that go into my business. As well as anything else that might come up. For the last year or so, I've been recording behind the scenes podcasts, videocasts, vlogs, whatever you want to call it, for my Patreon patrons. And so at the end of 2018, I decided to expand those into an official podcast that will be available to everyone, more or less. So the way this is going to go moving forward is that I will record one podcast every month that will be available to everyone. This will be on YouTube. It will be available on my website, which is mediaperuana.com. And I think I figured out how to make it available on iTunes and Stitcher and other podcast feeds, so you should be able to subscribe to the podcast. I may need to work out a few hiccups with that still, but I'm working on it. It's kind of hard to get things set up before you actually have an episode ready to go. So the plan is that it will be available to subscribe to on whatever podcast feeds you use. I personally use Downcast, but I know people use different ones. So you'll be able to find it in all of those places. And then I will also be recording a second episode every month. That will be exclusive to my Patreon patrons, so that will continue that tradition of having behind the scenes podcasts for them. That will only be available through the Patreon, I really don't know how to pronounce it, through that site. And you can get access to those, what I'm going to call half episodes. So this is episode 1. And the one later this month for my patrons will be 1.5. You can get access to that by supporting Media Peruana Designs on Patreon for as little as $1 a month. So there are 3 different support tiers, and the first tier is just $1 a month, and that will give you access to those other episodes of the podcast, as well as lots of other great stuff, free patterns and discounts on e-courses and things like that. So I hope you will check that out. It's at patreon.com/mediaperuana. So you may have found your way here sort of randomly searching through YouTube videos, or maybe you are someone who likes my knitting patterns, or maybe you're just one of my friends that wants to watch me make a fool out of myself talking about knitting. Hi, Claire. But whatever the case may be, I'll do a quick little introduction. I'm Kristen. I am a knitting pattern designer. I live in Maryland. I'm originally from Baltimore, and I still live in Maryland. I am the mom to 2 little boys. Ollie is 4.5. JJ will be 6 in less than a month, somehow. And I'm married to a very tall Peruvian man whose name is Martin. I started knitting, about 12 years ago. And I started designing patterns sort of as a hobby around 2012, and then more seriously as a business around 2014 or 15. So I have now published more than 80 patterns most of which are available through Ravelry, although there are a few that are third-party publications. But most of them you can find on Ravelry. I also am running currently one e-course a year, which is called Swatch Master. And I'm developing a second e-course, which is going to be offered in the summer, and that one is called Sweater Siren. When I'm not knitting or taking care of my two rambunctious children, I enjoy vegetable gardening, reading, and drinking wine and coffee, which you will probably see me doing occasionally because I am recording this podcast in the mornings when both of my children are at school. Ollie is in pre-K, so he's only at school about 2.5 hours a day. So I've got, by the time I get everybody to school and get home, I've got a little less than 2 hours to get things done. So that's, drinking coffee is one of those things. I had been considering the idea of starting a podcast for a while, but truthfully, I prefer writing. So I do maintain a blog on my website, but writing takes a little bit more time because I'm more of a perfectionist. So I'm rewriting and editing, and so it takes a while to get things, at the point where I'm ready to publish them. And then since the demise of Google Reader, I found that people really aren't reading blogs as much, that they're harder to keep up with. So I thought, take things to a podcast, be able to reach more people, because it's so much easier to sort of access podcasts. You can listen in the car or while you're cooking, or you can watch while you're doing things. And then I opted for video because obviously knitting is very visual. And I know lots of people have great success with audio podcasts about knitting, but for me it just made more sense to do video, even though I'm not super comfortable with it. So I'm sure this will be evolving as we go along, since it's my first episode. And I will appreciate your patience as I learn what I'm doing and how to do it, and refine and make a sort of coherent podcast for everybody. So that is enough rambling. Let's go ahead and get started with some personal knitting. So as you may know, the Indie Design Gift Along takes place every year, sort of from the end of November till the end of December. And it's a big promotion for indie pattern designers, and it's a big knit and crochet along. Mostly designed to have people working together, giving each other support to finish all the gift knitting that we tend to do for the holidays. But a lot of the indie designers that are participating take the opportunity to try to do some personal knitting and some selfish knitting that they don't get to do for the rest of the year. So that is what I did this year. I purchased 5 or 6 patterns that, when will I use them? I don't know, but hopefully at some point. I probably won't be designing forever, and it's nice to have a good healthy library. And so during the gift along, I managed to finish one project, and these are the Mine Slippers by Faye Kennington, and her Ravelry ID and business name is Yuki Knits, I believe. Of course, I will make sort of official show notes for the podcast and give links to all of these things, and you'll be able to find that on my website. So I finished these slippers. These are knit in a bulky weight, and this is Plush Bulky from Magpie Fibers, and she doesn't carry this all year. She this year had it late in the year, and I don't know if that's what she always does, but I know that it's not available throughout the year. I went to her holiday open house. Fortunate in that Magpie Fibers is about 30 minutes away from me in Frederick, Maryland, She had a holiday open house, so I went and picked up a big skein of this. It is so soft. This colorway is called Ghost Town. So as you can see, these are just a simple slipper with a cable on the front, and then garter stitch on the sole and sort of around the sides and the cuff. This was a really quick project. I started, I want to say, on the 29th, and the first slipper I knit came out too small. And I didn't do a gauge swatch because I figured the slipper would be my gauge swatch. So the first slipper came out too small. It might fit my son, actually. But the problem was I didn't have any larger needles, which is another reason I didn't do a gauge swatch. Because I was using the largest needle I had, which was a US 10. I don't like knitting on larger needles, and I don't use a lot of bulky yarn. So since I wasn't getting gauge, I actually had to finagle a little bit, and I knit the next size up in the pattern with the US 10 needles, and that came out as a perfect fit. And I do have a little bit of the yarn left, so I may go ahead and knit that second smaller slipper for my son. Maybe, because the way these work, you knit the cuff first, then this little cable panel, then you pick up stitches around and work in the round, and then you use Kitchener stitch to seam the sole, and it does make a little bit of I mean, it's not a seam. You can turn it inside out and see. It doesn't look like a seam, but it is a little stiff. You can feel it under your foot. It doesn't really bother me, but I have a sneaking suspicion it will bother my son. So, I don't know. I might kind of play with that and see if I can come up with a different way to seam the bottom. We'll see, because it's really beautiful yarn. It's very soft. You can see it has a little bit of a halo. It's a little bit fuzzy, and I don't want to waste it. It's not enough to do much of anything else with. So I don't want to waste it, so maybe I'll make him the smaller slippers and just see what happens. So this is the only thing I've had off the needles recently, but as always, I have plenty of things on the needles. I really want to knit more selfish sweaters. It's just that the time always seems to get away from me. And last year I used more sample knitters for my designs, thinking that it would give me more time to actually knit for myself, but somehow it didn't work out that way. So the main thing I have on the needles right now is this. It's like I'm in the middle of a row. This is a weekender, which I'm guessing pretty much everybody is familiar with. It's a pattern by Andrea Mowry. And it's inside out. I have finished the front. Okay. So I finished the front. Oof, that glare, that does not look good. There we go. I finished the front, and you can see this nice tubular bind off along the neck. Looks really neat and tidy. I really like that. That's a nice alternative to having to pick up a collar and work it. So I finished the front, and now I am apparently right in the middle of a row on the back. So this, I'm hoping, will be done by the end of the month. It would really be nice to have it done in time to actually wear it before it gets warm again. I will say, this I am using Neighborhood Fiber Company Soup de Worsted, and I actually don't know if this was a special edition yarn that I got as part of their yarn club a couple of years ago, and I'm not sure if they still actually sell Soup de Worsted or not. But it's like a BFL, so it is not super soft, but it's nice and sturdy and has a lot of structure. And it has a little bit of a halo to it too. And then of course this beautiful sort of a purple shot through with little lighter bits. Really like that. So I'm hoping it actually will soften up just a little bit when I wash and block it. So that's the major personal knitting I've actually had on the needles for a couple of months. And not that this is a complicated pattern at all. It's actually really nice, take with you knitting. You don't need the pattern, at your side constantly. It just, always seem to end up having something else to work on. And then another project that I cast on last night, but I miscalculated the yarn needed for the tail, so I had to rip out the cast on and I'll cast on again. For Christmas, I knit my sister a brioche bandana cowl, which is a pattern by Lavanya Patricella, and there was yarn left over. This is beautiful yarn from Forbidden Fiber Company. Let me say this is Mom Boss and Hair Boss are the colorways. They look beautiful together in the cowl, and there's plenty left over. So I told my sister I'd knit her a hat. Ostensibly for her birthday, but her birthday's Thursday, and I'm gonna see her Saturday, and there's almost no chance that it's gonna be done, but maybe. So I did cast on last night, but I miscalculated the tail. But this is the hat pattern. This is called Opari from Isolde, and I actually was searching Ravelry for a DK weight brioche hat, and found this, and it turns out it was already in my library. It's from her Knitworthy collection that I guess purchased 2 or 3 or maybe even 4 years ago. So it was nice. I already had that in the library. Probably won't get it done in time for my sister's birthday, but hopefully at least, this month before the weather turns warmer, she'll get a chance to wear it. And so that is just about all I have for on and off the needles. Okay, I'm going to call this next segment Adelante, which means sort of going forward, moving forward. Let's go. And so I'm going to show you some sneak peeks of design projects that are in the works. Generally speaking, for this sort of public episode of the podcast, these are going to be indie designs that I'm working on. For when I do designs for third-party publishers, a lot of times those need to be kept pretty secret. So I may share some sneak peeks of them, but that will most likely be in the patrons only episode of the podcast, because it will have a smaller private viewership that is not open to the public and will help keep things secret. But fortunately, right this very second, I am actually working on 2 indie designs. The first one is a pattern re-release. So as you may know, when you publish with third-party publishers, often there's a period of exclusivity, which means that the pattern can only be sold by the third-party publisher. And what the usual arrangement is that they pay you an upfront fee for your design, and then they have exclusive rights to it for a certain amount of time. So you're giving up your right to distribute and sell the pattern, but you get a big chunk of money up front, which is frankly one of the ways that I'm keeping my business going. But after the period of exclusivity, you can then do what you like with the pattern. All right, so the Guapa Mittens I released with Knit Picks 2 years ago, and they are going to return to me at the beginning of February. So I am working on developing the re-released pattern. I've added 2 sizes, and I'm also creating a fingerless mitts option for that. So what I'm working on is the sample for the fingerless mitts. As you can see, I haven't gotten very far. This yarn is from the Ross Farm, which you may know does a lot of breed-specific heritage breed yarns. And this is 100% Shetland. I purchased at Maryland Sheep and Wool a couple of years ago. It's just been sitting around waiting for a good project. And the yarn that is used for the original sample of these mittens is a sort of a luxury sport weight blend from Knit Picks called Paragon, which is very soft. And I thought it would be interesting to use a more rustic, sturdier yarn for the fingerless mitts version. So I'm working on that. You can see I just got the cuff done so far. But you can see this is a more rustic yarn. It's not, you know, the stitches aren't as precise. There's a little bit of variation. So I think that's going to give it an interesting look. I'm not sure about the stitch definition, how that's going to work out, so we'll see. The pattern uses what's called the bow stitch, but I think even with a more rustic yarn, it's going to still stand out. So I think it's going to be a different look than the original, but I think it's still going to work for the fingerless mitts. And this would be a nice quick project that you will be able to do before the winter comes to an end, either the mittens or the fingerless mitts. And with the addition of 2 sizes, it should now work from probably older kids up to men. So it originally just had small, medium, and large, which was probably, you know, women's small, women's medium, and then a men's small and medium for the medium and large. So I think now the new smallest size will work for older kids and teenagers and, you know, teeny tiny women, and the extra large size that I've added is going to work for bigger men. So that's going to be coming out in, I believe, February 3rd. It officially returns to me, so probably the first week of February you'll be able to see that. It is currently being test knit, and if you are interested in test knitting for Media Peruana Designs, you can hop over to mediaperuana.com/test-knitting and learn all about that and add your name to the list. And then the other project I'm working on is also mittens. For Christmas, I knit my husband a fingering weight brioche hat, the Harlow pattern by Andrea Mowry. And I used these 2 beautiful skeins of solo fingering from Magpie Fibers. I do use yarns other than Magpie Fibers, but I really like Damie's yarns, and she has been very supportive, and she's local, so I love using her yarns, but I do use other stuff. But again, I bought these at her holiday open house. This one is called Bell Bottom Blues, and this one is called London Rain. You can see the London Rain a little bit closer. It is a silver, but it's shot through with dark blues and browns. These work just beautifully together in the hat. Should have stolen it from my husband so I can show you guys, but he currently has it. But I have, as you can see, a lot left over. These are honestly nearly full. So I started playing around with something I've wanted to do for a while, which was a design inspired by a building called Casa de los Azulejos in Mexico City, which you've probably seen pictures of even if you're not familiar with the name. It's just covered in this blue and white tile. And you see a lot of stuff, you know, dishware and things like that are sort of inspired by the same style. So I've been wanting to do something inspired by that for a while, and these colors seemed really perfect. So I started this fingerless mitt. And just starting. Here's the thumb over here. So the thumb is just starting to grow out of the fingerless mitt. And let's look at the other side. You can see with the variation, and of course this is not blocked, with the variation in the contrast color, it looks like I'm using more than one color, but I'm not. And so at the bottom you have sort of these swirls, then you have this leaf design, and this is going into, right here, a diamond shaped design. And then I think for the second mitt, I'm going to go ahead and reverse the colors. I have not started test knitting for this one yet, because I'm still, just yesterday I had to fix the chart because I had messed something up. But I will be opening a test for it. Well, probably by the time this episode airs, I will be doing the test for it. So I actually was going to show you the chart, but I seem to have misplaced it. So if you're interested in that, again, you can sign up for test knitting emails, and you would need 2 contrasting colors of fingering weight yarn for that. And that I'm actually hoping to release at the very, very end of January. I always think color work is going to take a long time, but then once I get started, it moves pretty quickly. So my hope is that by the end of this week, I have the first mitt done, I get started on the test, and then the test, for the test, you would only have to finish one mitt by the test deadline, because they're identical. So hopefully I can actually get that ready to go by the end of the month. And those are the 2 designs that I currently have on the needles. The next segment that I have prepared for you guys is called How's That? And the idea behind this is that I use a lot of other languages, mostly Spanish, in naming my patterns. And sometimes people might be interested in what they actually mean and how those names came about. So I'm going to try every month to include a little segment where I explain how to pronounce and the meaning of any of my pattern names or other things that are in another language. So this is our first episode, and I'm going to explain 2 actually today, and they are Medio Peruana and Hilo Stitch. So let's start with Medio Peruana. It is Spanish, and it is actually a bit of a play on words in Spanish. My husband gave me the nickname Media Peruana, probably back when we first started dating. It means half Peruvian. And I love Peru. I have been there 4 times. It's a beautiful country. I love the food. Obviously, I like the language. Some of the men are attractive. So my husband gave me the nickname Medio Peruana. Media means half, and Peruana means Peruvian. But it's a bit of a play on words because, as you'll find in most languages, words can mean more than one thing, and the word media as a noun means sock. So you could also read it as Peruvian sock, a media peruana. So that is why you will see a sock in my design logo. So media peruana, half Peruvian or Peruvian sock. And then Hilo Stitch. I'm pretty sure everybody is familiar with the Disney movie Lilo and Stitch. When I was trying to think of podcast names, a friend of mine suggested a sort of punny name, which is pretty standard for knitting podcasts, and also she knows that I really enjoy terrible puns. And so since I already had, so Media Peruana is a bit of wordplay, the idea of something that was bilingual wordplay kind of resonated with me. And I actually am not familiar with a lot of the knitting terminology in Spanish. Because I'm not a native Spanish speaker, obviously I'm a gringa. And, knitting terms is not something you learn in school or come across in everyday conversation. So I didn't know a lot of the words, but I knew the basics. So that's where I started with puntos or stitches. Hilo is yarn or thread. Knitting is tejer, and I forget what the other one word I knew was. Oh, agujas or needles. So I started with those 4 words, playing around, and eventually landed on Hilo and Stitch. So it sounds like, obviously, the movie name, but Hilo is yarn or thread, so it's yarn and stitch. At first I couldn't really decide whether it was terribly clever or just terrible. And then I began to wonder, maybe it's already taken. I did some research first, and there are several businesses in the world called Hilo and Stitch. Most of them are craft shops, embroidery, sewing, like tailors and things like that. But there were no podcasts. So the next thing I did was to sort of run a very, very informal poll on my Instagram stories, and everyone seemed to enjoy the name. So there you go, Hilo and Stitch, the Yarn and Stitch podcast. Right, the next segment I have for you is just a quick segment that's going to be about events. This could be things I think you might be interested in that are going on in the fiber arts world, events that I'll be participating in, and any events that I'm actually running or hosting, like knit-alongs and things like that. So currently I am running a knit-along. It is called the Juntos Knit-Along for Togetherness. And this is a 2-month, more or less, knit-along based on my 2018 pattern collection called Juntos Knits for Togetherness. Juntos is a 10 pattern collection of garments and accessories for both adults and kids. So the adult patterns and the kids patterns coordinate, but they don't match. And so to participate in this knit along, you just have to knit any pattern or patterns from the Juntos collection. It includes, let me think, 2 women's sweaters, a women's vest, and a men's sweater. And then it includes 3 kids' sweaters, a kid's vest, a men's vest, and a shawl cowl, and socks. So everything in between all of those is sized for the whole family. The kids' pieces are designed to be unisex, so great for boys and girls. Pretty much anybody you might want to knit for, you're going to find a pattern in there. And just hop in at any time that you want, pick any pattern, and join us. It is being held primarily in my Ravelry group, which I will link to in the show notes. And it runs until March 15th-ish. I'll have to check the exact date. I will include that in the show notes as well. But that gives you a solid 2 months if you want to knit a bigger project like a sweater. You can, of course, knit multiple projects. The knit along is being sponsored by Anzula, so if you use Anzula yarn for any of your projects, then you'll get bonus entries. And there's going to be a grand prize, as well as monthly prizes on Instagram when you share pictures of your whips with the hashtag JuntosCal. So go ahead and join us for that. I hope to see you there. I personally am hoping to finish my X9 socks for the knit along. I started them way back in the summer when I published the pattern, and they're still not done. So that will be my project for the knit along. I hope to have a new pair of socks for myself by the time we're done in March. And then the other event coming up is Vogue Knitting Live in New York. I will be attending this year for the first time. I missed Rhinebeck in 2018 for the first time in a while, but it was my 20th high school reunion. I decided I could give up Rhinebeck for the weekend, but it was a hard choice. So I decided that I would go to Vogue Knitting Live this year. I am not exhibiting or teaching. I'm just there as a muggle. I will be arriving on Friday and staying through Sunday. I'm attending a lecture. I'm taking one class, which I believe is a class with Franklin Habit about zippers, installing zippers, which I'm really terrible at. And then I'll just be around, on the show floor buying yarn, looking around. I really don't care for New York City. It's very crowded and there are a lot of people and it's loud, but I would have preferred to be at Rhinebeck, but I'm going to be at Vogue Knitting Live, so if you are going to be there, I would love to say hi to you. Just pop over and say hi. I will also probably do a special sort of behind the scenes podcast from Vogue Knitting Live, and any special event podcast that I do will also be exclusively for Patreon patrons. So again, when you sponsor Media Padawana Designs, as little as $1 a month, you get access to all of those episodes. So those are the two events that are coming up this month. Okay, I think that is about it for the very first episode. This is starting to run long. Presumably, as I practice, I'll get better at being a little more concise. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope you will continue to watch. Everything that I've talked about, I will link in some show notes that will be available on my website at mediapadawana.com/Hilo and Stitch. But websites don't play nicely with ampersands. You actually have to spell out and. If you are looking for me on social media, you can find me on Facebook and Instagram as Media Padawana. There's also my username on Ravelry, where you can find all of my patterns. Again, thank you so much for joining me, and I will see you in the next episode of Hilo and Stitch.